I'm very excited to be bringing you one of my newer friends here, Sigrid Dalberg-Krajewski. I got pretty close, I think, Sigrid. Welcome to the podcast today. Was that close enough?
Thank you. I think it was very, very good. Very good first attempt of pronouncing my a little complicated name. But you did a very good job. I feel very welcome.
Oh, thank you for that. And actually, as we get going, would you mind giving us a bit of our listeners today, a bit more of a background? It's a beautiful name. I'd love if you could speak it in your mother tongue, as it were, and just give us a bit of background. Where does that come from, your name?
Sure. So, how I would pronounce it in my hometown of Stockholm, Sweden, would be Sigrid Dalberg-Krajewski. So it's a little bit less, I think, upbeat than the English version. And Sigrid is actually a old Viking name, and it means beauty and victory, which I very much relate to, obviously. And Dahlberg is my mother's family name. It's very, very Swedish. It means Valley of the Mountains, and Krajewski or Krajewski is my father's surname, which has Polish ancestry. So that's where I'm coming from.
Thank you so much for sharing. Because immediately, I've got a mental picture of each of those descriptors you just gave of what your name represents, and I just think there's a whole story
Yeah.
behind your name, and I just think that's beautiful. Do we give ourselves permission when we are trying to raise consciousness and learn more about each other to know each other's story? Maybe we can start there, Sigrid. Do we give ourselves that space to truly understand each other's stories?
I think we could get much better at doing that. Um, when you mention if we give ourselves or if we are conscious about our stories, I think, especially perhaps in a virtual setting where many of the conversations that we have are quite transactional, operational, not so much focused on the individual that we're talking to or with, but rather about the work that is being done, the story and where people are coming from might become secondary, which I think is a shame because that's how we can identify more with each other and appreciate differences, understand the various contexts to which we make decisions, maybe even how we react in conflict or to change or to visionary thinking. It's also dependent on where we're from. And I do think, Gary, that we could take more conscious time to explore that, especially in a team setting where many people might have joined virtually. You know, people might not have had the chance to get to know each other over a welcome pizza or a welcome team coffee where you can actually see how someone's profile looks, because you don't only have to see them like full frontal, but really to the side and how people move and how people speak and mannerisms. What people wear, which is not just a white shirt on top and then maybe trunks in the bottom, but really get that feeling for who people are. I think it happens so much more naturally or seamlessly in a physical setting where you bump into each other at the coffee machine, etc., etc. Such a tired example, but it's true. So when we talk about not only perhaps introducing people to our story, but introducing people to more of our personality based on a digital framework, that's something we need to put time to do and move away from, again, as I mentioned, this sort of set conversation in the workplace or in the virtual workplace where so much is focused on what are the daily tasks, what is the strategy that we want to fulfill, what are obstacles ahead, rather than how are you feeling today? How are you arriving? How can we make you land? Was it a rough night? Was it a good morning? How are you doing?
That is so beautiful. You've got me also reflecting now straight away, Sigrid, actually, on since the pandemic, am I being as intentional as I can be? Because I work in corporate as you do, in my full-time job. And I'm challenging myself right now because I have not actually, when I've met new colleagues, I haven't always had the empathy or understanding that that person's joining our organization from a purely virtual setting. And how does that feel to them? What's the difference in experience for them joining us compared to their previous role where they may have been in person? What a beautiful onboarding step to truly see the human as they come in. And I've not thought about it that way before.
I think that the onboarding part has never been as important as it is now, because that first impression is harder to alter if you get it wrong, because you just have the virtual interface. So you can't have someone coming in, knocking on your shoulder and said, hey, I know that you had a bit of a slippery onboarding session today. The speaker was late. Your computer didn't arrive on time. I'm sorry about that. Can I buy you lunch? Doesn't happen now. So we're thinking about how can we build in those personal connections? How can we build in that attachment straight away to the team? And one of the things that we're doing, which is not rocket science, but it's very much appreciated, is we have an onboarding buddy for everyone who joins, who is not their direct lead or part of the direct team, but someone who you could ask questions like, hey, what's the best approach if I want to bring up a new suggestion to my new boss? Like, do you have any insights? To level the playing field a little bit. But that again is perhaps a bit more of a transactional example. So let me give you a personal one. We have an overview of our team members' favorite drinks, films, karaoke songs, movies, whatnot. And when we create our team events, we base part of the content on people's preferences. So say that normally maybe you would go to a restaurant and everyone can order their favorite drink and their favorite meal and whatnot. A bit trickier when we are working remotely. But what we did for this year's holiday party is that we sent a care package to each team member with their favorite drink, with some of their favorite food, so that we could sort of replicate that feeling from your home. And that was really, really nice. It was also interesting to see what people were in fact drinking. Very, very peculiar taste from some of my dearest team members were like, you drink that? Is that your favorite? Interesting. Right. So I think that's the one aspect where it's just such an easy thing to do. It doesn't cost you much, but it's a great aspect of taking people's no, let me rephrase that. I think it's a good way of meeting people where they are. And it's a good way of bringing out our differences and actually making them the connector.
I've got a whole upper body reaction as you just shared that last comment, because you're really speaking to the importance. And this podcast, one of the key objectives is to share stories of how we embrace, not just celebrate and acknowledge, but truly unleash the benefit of diversity. And I think you just spoke to that brilliantly, is actually being really clear consciously of one another's differences and those lived experiences is actually an amplifier and accelerant of connection and performance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think differences can cause a lot of great collaboration. It could also cause a lot of friction. But in friction, you have innovation. So when something is a little bit itchy, when something is seen as a bit of a challenge, there's always so much opportunity because the territory is new. So when we celebrate differences, when we celebrate diversity, it is about bringing out those moments, but with the element of inclusion that secures that everyone still feels like they belong. So that your differences do not set you aside, they might set you apart as a cultural addition rather than a cultural fit, but you're still part of the group. You're still invited to the party, you're brought up to the dance, you enjoy the music, you can put on your own tunes, and everyone will dance to them as well. You can be 100% you, still be different, but that those differences are sort of the glue that keeps us together, because how else could it be?
You know something? I love the question, how else could it be? But a lot of the established systems are built on sameness. They are based on avoiding friction. And I've got this metaphor in my mind right now, this feeling actually, Sigrid, as we speak, of like a 45-degree sliding piece of plastic. And actually, what most organizations that are now out of date and suffering with this new pandemic life, they're still running up this 45-degree perspex and just sliding back down, running up, sliding back down, because everything's the same. There's nothing to hook onto, whereas the difference is like the climbing wall. Oh, there's a footing there because there's someone that doesn't look or sound like me. Or there's another footing there. They've got a different lived experience. And I don't know, that just totally came up in the moment as a metaphor in my mind.
Yeah, I love that metaphor. I'm going to give you another one. So imagine we're out at sea and you have a couple of speedboats. They all look the same. They can drive really, really, really fast. They can also be driven by one person or one type of person, because it doesn't take so many different capabilities to steer that boat. And then you look at gorgeous, gorgeous ship where people have different roles, and they have different roles because they have different capabilities, and their collective experience is what's driving the boat forward. And it might not be yet the speediest boat, but it's the boat that's going to stand the test of time. Because when these people go together and they build either a speedboat that can be driven by whoever, whenever, they're going to surpass their own ship and the rest of the boats. So I think that, yes, the plastic, I totally agree with that. The question is also, I think, as a company who's trying to run up that piece of plastic, is the first question is like, why are you running on the plastic? Like, why don't you just jump off the plastic and find a more sustainable way of doing things, which might be outside of your comfort zone, but it's going to push you forward in a way that the 45-degree angle is not going to do to you ever. So it takes a bit of courage if you're an organization that's used to just being on the plastic, because it is something new. But from that friction, from that innovation, what a better company to be at.
Thank you for sharing that ship method. That's lovely. That's really clear in my mind. I'd love our listeners to learn a bit more about your background. I think they've got a sense of Sigrid, what you're doing. We haven't introduced your corporate role yet, but I'm sure we'll step in. Yeah, we'll step into that in a little bit. But it's very clear to me from our conversation today, you're a very holistic systems thinker. You understand how everything connects. And I'm wondering, where does that come from? Of course, I've researched a bit of your background, but I'm wondering, are there any sort of life experiences, education? What informs that worldview that you have right now? Really interested.
Well, it is definitely a result of education. Absolutely. I studied political science, and we were always taught and encouraged to analyze the full picture rather than just movements that were separate from the rest of society. If we were studying that, we thought about, okay, how does it fit in? What are other aspects that sort of laid the foundation for this to even happen in the first place. So not just looking at the status quo, but rather understanding where is it coming from and how can it develop. So I think those three aspects of where are we coming from, where are we now, and where do we want to go is really something that when you study politics, when you study societies, when you study policy, when you study philosophy, you sort of get as part of your education. But holistic thinking is not only about being able to analyze and have a strategy in place, perhaps have a vision, an understanding of where we're coming from, but also have a feeling for what motivates people, because it is all about people in the end. Who is going to drive this forward? It is our people. And that is not perhaps something that you learn in political science. There it's more about the systems and perhaps some of the great people that have moved it forward or made a change or challenged the system. So if I look at more my childhood and perhaps my parents, my mother is a doctor, she's a surgeon, and my father is an architect. And they have two very different entry points, right? But something that they always repeated was, you can't only think with your mind, you need to think with your heart and with your gut as well. So I think combining an analytical mind, where you look at the current status quo, you look at what caused it, and you look at where we want to go, in combination with a sense of what does the head, heart, and your tummy tell you? It's a good approach in my book.
My head's going off again. I got more buzzes. Like this is a good sign. If you're listening, I had a previous podcast called Value Through Vulnerability, and for those that know me, like when you have this energetic connection, that when I say my head's buzzing, it literally is buzzing, because what you're speaking to is just so soul enriching, Sigrid, for me, because it's very rare I still think today, for people that operate within senior roles in a corporation to be able to speak so clearly and concisely to the head heart combination. So it's not or, it's and I think this is part of the world we're moving towards. It's an and world. It doesn't have to be an or world anymore. It doesn't have to be separate, to use that word. It's a network of all things, yeah, and not separated things. And I think that's a big shift. I think right now we're undergoing, is that move from the belief we need to be separate to actually we are part of one system.
Absolutely. And related to that, I think the notion of what is a good leader is also changing, because we have had, I think, in the past quite maybe very traditional image of what makes a good leader. So if we take the ship metaphor again, if you watch like Master and Commander or all these movies about great leaders, it's literally like one person who comes in and saves the day. And I'm like, that's not a good leader. A good leader is someone who brings a team together and who's not interested in being the one person saving the day, but rather looking at how do we get to a point where there is no need for one person to save the day? And how can we make sure that leadership is not only about performing and about delivering results as a single contributor, like the opposite actually of being a leader, but rather as someone who can deliver through their teams. And if you want to be a leader who deliver through your teams, you have to take a step back. You have to give control to someone else, which can be scary. You have to let other people shine, but take the hit if something goes wrong, which is part of your role. But ultimately, it's about empowering people to do their best work in the best way that they see fit. You can map out a vision, you can map out a strategy, but if you don't have your team on board for that journey, you're going to be alone. And I don't think anyone who's considering themselves as a modern leader want to be Russell Crowe in Master and Commander, if it is him. I don't remember if it is, but I think it's him. And standing alone on a ship that's going towards wreckage. Like, I think we just need to step away from that traditional view of what leadership is and what it isn't, and look to what are leaders that make our team perform but still feel really good about their workplace.
Of course, we have evidence coming out of our ears and all around the world as to there's a business benefit of this, Sigrid. Like there's so much. I have it in my own work organization where we added 6 million and 1.5 million margin over 3 years through a culture change. Like we did nothing else apart from shift how we came together as human beings, and we delivered this exceptional result. So I'm really intrigued. So this podcast called Activating Consciousness. So we're trying to help people listening in step into a higher level, whatever that means to them, of consciousness. You've given some great tips, actually, really actionable ones, which is great so far. Thank you. If you're okay, I'd love to segue a little bit into the organization that you work for and that you serve, if that's okay, in Delivery Hero, because I've been following your journey as Sigrid and also your team for the last 12 months. And one of my biggest questions I have when I think about sustainability, regeneration, life giving, which I think you're really role modeling quite exceptionally, is how do you develop an organizational structure that feels like it's alive and isn't the old machine metaphor? So that feels to me to be the direction you're going in. Is that an unfounded assumption? Is that a conscious decision? I'd love you to speak a little bit to, because you're going so fast on the one hand, yet it feels very organic and alive on the other hand. And I'm wondering if that's what supports the speed, because you have this flexibility and this organic nature of the business. So there are a couple of questions in there, but I'd love you to speak to that if you don't mind.
Right. Let me unpack that a little bit. So when I joined Delivery Hero, which was approximately a year ago now, we had a great team in place who were really, really fond of each other and worked extremely well together. It was a small team, and it was a team that had been without direction for quite a couple of months, and a team that was, in terms of scale, not really prepared perhaps to meet the challenges and scrutiny as well that a company of our size is subject to. So one of the first things that I consciously did was looking at how can we build this team for scale without losing the amazing sense of culture which is already in place. So rather than looking at change, we're thinking about how do we pivot into growth while staying connected, staying grounded, but being part of the same journey. So one of the first steps was really to set a vision and a strategy for the team as a whole, not just separate functions, not just separate areas of expertise, but what work do we want to contribute to together as a togetherness? What is the impact that we're looking to have? What is our purpose? And can you all sign off on this? So co-creation, in order to get there, reiteration, get as many people as possible on board to this journey, and then constantly challenging this as we go along. I don't think we will ever be finished. We'll never be complacent with the current strategy, with the current way that we do things, but always looking for a better way, a more clever way, more inclusive way to do things. So again, this sort of aspect of not only the head, heart, and the tummy, but also the hands. How do we operationalize this? And the way that we create connectiveness or connectivity and move together as a joint force. I think that's extremely important. And to a large extent, it is something that can rely on a strategy, but not alone. So we need to create a team that trusts each other, a team that stands up for each other, and a team that is willing to go the extra mile, and at the same time say, hey, it's been a lot recently. Take a step back, look at our priorities, and make sure that we do what moves the needle at the moment. So again, your notion of nothing is static, this elasticity of team dynamic, of team building, and of team leadership, super important. And part of that journey, I think, has been to really, really, really check in with the team. Temperature checks, how we're feeling, how we're doing, and adding, and I can't stress this enough, really, an element of fun. Like, it needs to be fun to work. It needs to be fun to build a strategy. It needs to be fun to, well, it's not fun always, but most of the time to build OKRs and to feel like we're making an impact. So connecting what our team is doing to the general good of the business is important, but also to the good that we can do in the societies and the communities in which we operate. I don't think you can separate them in this world of sort of purpose-driven work. It's not only about what you can do for the company. It's not only about how you feel in your team. It's about how do we make a difference? How do we have a positive impact in the markets, in the societies, in the communities that we touch? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, 100%. It really does. And what's really beautiful is that it segues into another one of, actually, you've covered what already in advance, one of my questions, which is brilliant, because there's something really beautifully symbiotic around how it feels that you and the business you work for operates. And that is this very emergent, yet there's enough structure in place. You have your OKRs, you have your reviews, you have your check-ins. So there's enough structure, but it's not rigid. So like, it's almost like having guide rails going bowling.
Yeah.
You hit those edges, you know there's a hard stop, but anything else in between, go do your stuff. Be the great human being, show up fully. That's what it feels like to me, which is so what's needed to navigate change as business as usual, Sigrid.
Yeah. And taking that bowling court again, I love the allegories, is that it's okay to fail. Like, if you hit the rail, someone will come and pick you up. If you hit the rail one time, you know how to throw your bowling bowl, whatever it's called, better the next time. And I think that's also one aspect that makes Delivery Hero such a dynamic place to be in, that it's okay if you fail as long as you try. So rather go ahead and do something. Maybe it's not 100% right in the first tryout, but you've given it a go. And you're going to learn something for it. You're going to be a better employee for it. You're going to feel more inspired for it. And ultimately, you might try 5 things that doesn't work. But that sixth thing might be just one of the new areas of business or new type of process that's gonna either help so many people in the company, outside the company, or going to make your team better for it. And that's worth the failures. I think it's a nice idea that that failing is not a end game. It's just a part of something bigger. It's part of a journey. It's part of finding a solution. I mean, how can you can't find solutions to everything directly. You have to hit some blockers, and that's not a failure. It's just part of the trip. So I think this sort of not I wouldn't say obsessiveness, but this openness to failing forward is really something that I'm trying to also distill into my team, to spark this creativity and also ownership. You can do things on your own because you have a great idea. Okay? How can we enable you to do it in the best way possible? That's core.
Really, really love that. I'd love to ask, is there something in maybe recently or in the last 12 months where you've maybe in your own mind failed, or what have you learned or become more conscious about in recent months or the last 12 months? Is there something you wouldn't mind sharing?
Absolutely. So one of the realizations that I've had in the last couple of months is that I've become way more aware of my triggers. And one of my triggers is exclusion. And when I feel excluded, I tend to try to find solutions on my own to deal with things in the best way that I see fit, which is not always the easiest way, right? Because then you're a lone wolf. And I'm a team player, so I don't enjoy that going at it alone type of mission.
Mm-hmm.
So in moments of exclusion, for me, it's been a big learning curve to simply ask to be included, to not make assumptions of why I'm not in a specific room or in a specific meeting, even though I think I should be there, but ask, hey, I want to be part of this. Is it okay? And that can be scary because you're knocking on a door that you yourself perceive as closed. And knocking on a closed door can be frightening. But what I've also realized is that most of the time the door opens. And that's really nice. So that's like a personal thing that I've really, that has really been a learning curve for me. And it came from failings/blockings that I was mainly creating for myself by not knocking on that door. So that's a personal reflection, and I would hope that if people hear this and start knocking on those doors, don't make the same mistakes as I did in the past. But another perhaps more operational example is realizing that repetition for communication is absolutely vital. I believe that in a world that is so fast and that moves in such a speedy manner, it is easy to continuously try to not reinvent, but create new storylines, create new angles to a certain story, or explore a new story. And what we don't realize is that it takes time for messages to come across. It takes time to foster a public perception. It takes time to build reputation. And if you're too quick on changing your messages, nothing is going to stick. And I'm not a very patient person. So for me, that has really been sort of both an internal and external experience of, we need to hammer this one in. And it's going to take time. It's going to take persistence. It's going to take determination, resilience, perseverance. Stay on it. You don't need to change course all the time. Stay on it. It's going to be the best thing for the company. Might not be the most fun thing because you want to explore new stuff, but it's what's going to move the needle. And it's long term. It's something that might feel a bit more safe, which can also be a nice harbor to steer into. but it also gives room, and I think this is the realization, it gives room for depth. You don't have to be shallow. You can go deep dive, and you can make people understand why certain things are really important because you keep talking about it. So to wrap it up, personal experience is how to deal with a feeling of exclusion and turn it into open doors. And operational business-wise experiences for communications, repetition is key. And we need to stay at it, even though it might get tiring, because it allows for a deeper kind of communication.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm very conscious of time. Do I grab you for a few more minutes, Sigrid?
Yes.
Is that okay? Thank you so much. I want to share, I just love your vulnerability as well. I hope people can feel the authenticity and the depth of your response, because I could see it. I can see you as well as hear you, and it's really beautiful. And it's really interesting that for me, it's almost two similar stories. So for me, one of the big realizations has been, you can see I've got a broken finger on my wedding ring finger. That is from my dog. I took her to go and do some training a few weeks ago and thought I could do it on my own. And of course, I couldn't. So the lead got wrapped around my finger and it went click. Had I asked my wife for help, we wouldn't have had that situation. So a really, really simple personal example. Sometimes we think we can do it all ourselves. From a work point of view, very similar to your one in that, because I am such a change activist, I really do believe in better, and I'm always striving to grow and develop and co-create and reimagine. That can be scary for people that don't want to be on that journey all of the time. So again, back to that empathy point, is actually just because I know the world can be so much better and I believe it can be this, like, A, do I communicate how someone else can come along with that? One. And B, for those that don't want to do that because they're doing great stuff in their own space, how do we make sure they stay included in their own way if that's the journey of travel? And that's a continuous practice for me, Sigrid. Continuous practice.
I totally sign off on that. I think that's so key for building healthy teams and also being a healthy leader. And so yes, that resonates a lot, and I could replicate that answer myself and maybe I'll bring it to another conversation, but it was really, you summed up very nicely.
My last question for you today, and I hope there will be a part two, because I feel like we've just got going, Sigrid, to be honest. So there's so much to explore, but I'd love to leave again with the podcast being called Activating Consciousness. One of the last questions for today for me, for you personally, but also for you and Delivery Hero, is you are this incredibly high growth global organization, but you're serving locally through your heroes. What is the impact of that on the climate? So I ask a question from someone that works in chemical industry, and we are shipping products all around the world, adding that CO2 to the world where products are manufactured in a local place, but are being shipped from that place to another part of the world. Is Delivery Hero helping reduce that impact on the climate by actually delivering in place rather than shipping around the world? Is that part of the vision?
Yes. And I'm loving this question because Delivery Hero is doing, I think so personally, quite a tremendous job at building a sustainability program. So when we think about how we can either combat climate change or be a positive force in the world, sustainability is one of the core aspects. So what you mentioned with local deliveries is something that we have been embarking upon in the last, I would say, 1.5 years now. So what we do is Delivery Hero does not only deliver food, which is obviously locally produced because it's from local restaurants, but Delivery Hero is on a mission to deliver anything that we can locally. So this means that we team up with local shops, local stores, that might not have access to an online customer base, and we connect them to our users. So this means that if you're at home and you're running to the airport and all of a sudden you realize that you forgot your charger, and you know that there won't be any time to buy one at the airport, you could have a courier sending a charger to your taxi stop or to your home or wherever you are to sort of fill that instant need. But it's not a charger which is brought to you from a distant warehouse in another country. It's a charger that's brought from your corner shop. What we have in attachment to that is something that we call DMarts. Now, DMarts is small local warehouses that are placed in central locations in the city or in suburbs, but not in a prime address. So it's not placed in a street where you would maybe go and buy some high fashion, or where you would have some of the more exclusive shops. It's around the corner. So it doesn't have to be a fancy address, but it has to be a really central location. And those small shops are literally like, if you would imagine like a cloud store. So you can't go in to buy anything there, but they are designed to deliver fast, conveniently, straight to your door. So it's just shops that are made for online retail, which means that with a central location, a limited selection of things, you can receive goods to your house, to the office, wherever you are, in approximately 20 minutes, which is quite fantastic. And that is sort of one aspect of how we connect to local communities and how we avoid to have an unsustainable type of supply chain. However, in attachment to that, the sustainability program that we are developing and that is already implemented consists of going carbon neutral in as many markets as possible. We've just gone carbon neutral in Latin America, and last year we reached that milestone for Europe. And hopefully by the end of the year, we're carbon neutral all over the world. And we do that primarily via offsetting. Another way for us to become more sustainable and to actually have a direct impact that is baked into the experience of being a Delivery Hero user is to look into how we deal with waste. Mm-hmm. And if you're an avid takeaway orderer, like I am myself, or become during the pandemic because I don't want to cook every day, when you look at your deliveries, there's a lot of plastic there. Even if you don't order cutlery, you usually get plastic cutlery if you don't need them. So we're approaching this in two different ways. For many, many markets, you have to check in if you need cutlery, otherwise it's not included, which is the first small little step that we can reduce waste. But another one, which is really interesting, and perhaps we can make our next conversation about this, is sustainable packaging. So if you think about Delivery Hero as almost an ecosystem or a universe of delivery, we have a lot of markets with a lot of reach. Some days we deliver more than 5 million orders per average. Not always, but some days we hit that. Imagine if those 5 million orders all were made by sustainable packaging. That's a massive impact. It's also a massive industry shift. And if we can be part of that, but also spearhead that shift and encourage other industry players to join, we're in a good place to have an incremental impact. So it's not just about connecting customers to local stores. It's not just about reducing our carbon footprint or eliminating it in total, but it's about finding long-lasting solutions that are part of what makes our service great. And if we can do that in a sustainable way, we'll be on a good path. And we're getting there. We're not perfect, but we're getting there. And we have a fantastic CSR team who is supporting all of these efforts globally. And I would be happy to share more news coming straight from them the next time we speak.
Very exciting. That's brilliant. And yes, there is definitely another conversation to be had, Sigrid, if you're open, because this really gets to the nub of, again, what this platform is all about, is bringing these stories to life so that others can learn from them, but also so that we can raise awareness that this is actually happening.
Yes.
Because I think we need more, and it's not just good news stories, because this stuff isn't easy. This reimagining is not an easy thing to do in the current climate. But the more we share these stories, hopefully it inspires others to take the courageous steps.
That would be great. Whenever you have time, I'm in.
Yeah, wonderful. Let me know. So as we wrap up this first conversation, Sigrid, how can people follow up with you, maybe connect with you on your social channels, if they want to really follow up and get connected to Sigrid directly herself? How can people do that?
Well, I guess the best way is LinkedIn, where I'm quite active, and I love that platform. Twitter as well. So my handle is Sigrid Dalberg-Krajewski for LinkedIn, and for Twitter it's just Sigrid Krajewski because couldn't fit it all. And I would really also take the moment to encourage people who are already listening to this fabulous podcast to listen to another fantastic podcast, which is Hero Voice, which is our Delivery Hero corporate podcast that I'm hosting, where we're trying to go behind the scenes of what really happens at this fantastic group company, not only at a central headquarter level, but also stepping into our markets to take a pulse check of what's going on. I think that's the three best ways: Twitter, LinkedIn, and the podcast.
Perfect. Well, I will make sure all of those are in the show notes, Sigrid. And again, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a beautiful conversation, and I'm so glad we've got a second one lined up already. Have a great day.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.